The voice on the radio comes in flat and steady, the way voices do when they are not excited but are carrying information that matters. Southbound Atigun, starting from the bottom. That is all it says. No greeting, no explanation, no drama. But every driver on the Dalton Highway who hears those 5 words knows exactly what they mean. Somewhere ahead, on a gravel road that climbs to nearly 4,800 feet inside the Brooks Range, a convoy of loaded semi-trucks is descending one of the most treacherous grades in North America. And the road belongs to them. Most people have never heard of a convoy call-out. Most people have never needed to. Most people have never sat behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound loaded rig at the top of a 12% grade, with ice under the tires and nothing but open mountain air on one side, and a frozen riverbank on the other. For the drivers who run the North Slope Haul Road, call-outs like that one are not colorful radio chatter. They are the system. They are how a convoy stays alive. This is the story of how Arctic convoys cross Alaska's most dangerous roads. Not the story of the weather, not the story of the mountains, but the story of the drivers inside those cabs, working together through a communication system that most of the country has never heard of. Hauling cargo that the North Slope cannot survive without, on a highway so demanding that the experience of running it cannot be replicated anywhere else on Earth. Before we go further, if you are watching this on your television, thank you. Most of our audience watches exactly the way you do, and this channel only keeps going because of people who subscribe and share it with others. If this story is the kind of content you want more of, passing it along to someone who might find it valuable is the most meaningful thing you can do for us. It costs nothing, and it reaches people who have no idea what truck drivers actually face out here. Now, let us go north. The Dalton Highway runs 414 miles from a junction north of Fairbanks to Deadhorse, a few miles short of the Arctic Ocean at Prudhoe Bay. It was built in 1974 to support construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System and completed in just 5 months. The road runs roughly parallel to the pipeline for much of its length and includes 7 of the pipeline's pump stations as landmarks. Its official name is the James W. Dalton Highway, named after an Arctic engineer involved in early North Slope oil exploration. Truckers call it the Haul Road. That name was there first, and it tells you something the formal name does not. This road was built to haul things, and hauling is still what it does. The surface is mostly gravel. About a quarter of the route is paved. The rest is compacted rock and dirt that turns to mud in the short Alaskan summer, freezes into ridged washboard in autumn, ices over in winter, and cracks into potholes so deep they have bent axles on rigs moving at legal speed. The road is narrow by any lower 48 standard and carries heavy industrial traffic that simply does not exist on highways built for public use. Freight companies including Carlisle Transportation, Linden Transport, Alaska West Express, 49th Freight, Span Alaska Transportation, and Black Gold Express run the road regularly, keeping the North Slope supplied with everything from fuel to heavy equipment to food. According to Alaska DOT traffic monitoring data, the station at milepost 339, on the north side of the Brooks Range, counted an average of 210 vehicles per day in 2023. Across a single month, roughly 3,700 large trucks travel the road even through the depths of the Arctic winter. What that means in practice is that the Dalton is never empty. At any hour of any day, there are trucks on it. Northbound trucks carrying loads up to, and sometimes exceeding 110,000 pounds. A premium over the 80,000-pound federal limit in the lower 48, permitted under Alaska's different weight tolerances that acknowledge the realities of remote supply logistics. Southbound trucks returning empty or carrying materials extracted from the oil fields. And somewhere, always, there is a pass to deal with. Atigun Pass at mile 244 is where the convoy question becomes most serious. The pass crosses the continental divide of the Brooks Range at an elevation of 4,739 feet, the highest year-round road crossing in Alaska. South of the pass, rivers flow toward the Pacific Ocean and the Bering Sea. North of it, they run toward the Arctic Ocean. The pass is the only road crossing of the Brooks Range in existence. There is no alternate route. If Atigun closes, the north slope closes by road, and the consequences ripple outward immediately. Fuel deliveries stop, equipment shipments stall, and the oil fields begin drawing down reserves that cannot be replenished until the pass reopens. The grades at Atigun reach 12% in places. On a dry summer day, that is demanding but manageable for a skilled heavy-haul driver. In February, with ice embedded in the gravel and temperatures dropping toward -40 or colder, that same grade is a completely different problem. The truck weighs as much as a small building. The brakes behave differently in extreme cold. The road surface provides dramatically less friction than any paved interstate, and on both sides of the roadway, the terrain offers no margin for error. On one side, a slope dropping away into the Dietrich River Valley. On the other, a rock face carved by glacial movement over millions of years. A sign at the entrance to the avalanche zone on Atigun's south side reads, simply, "Avalanche area next 5 miles. Do not stop." It is not a suggestion. This is the geography inside which convoy operations exist. And to understand why convoys form, you have to understand what happens when a fully loaded semi descends Atigun alone. In winter, without coordination. A single truck descending a 12% grade at 4,800 feet carries enough mass and momentum that its braking system works continuously. Experienced drivers describe the descent as a controlled conversation between the foot brake, the engine brake, also called the Jake brake, and the road surface itself. You modulate all three constantly. You read the grade ahead and adjust speed before the grade changes. You keep enough space between yourself and the vehicle ahead that, if that vehicle slows unexpectedly, you have room and time to respond without jackknifing or pushing the lead vehicle off the road. That following distance is not derived from a textbook. It is calculated through years of running that exact piece of road under conditions that change daily, sometimes hourly. Now add a second truck, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. A convoy descending Atigun is not simply a group of trucks going the same direction. It is a coordinated sequence of heavy vehicles, each one of which must maintain its own safe following distance, while simultaneously being part of a longer chain that stretches for several miles. The lead truck sets the pace. The vehicles behind follow it. If any vehicle in the chain develops a problem, a brake issue, a slide, a blown tire, every truck behind must respond. And on Atigun in winter, the distance required for a loaded semi to stop on ice is not measured in car lengths. It is measured in hundreds of feet. The communication system that makes convoy operation work on the haul road is built around CB radio, and a second layer that not every lower 48 driver would recognize. As documented in 10-4 magazine's account of Alaskan trucking, drivers on the haul road use both CB radios and VHF big radios that provide broader and more reliable coverage in the remote sections where CB range becomes limited. The combination gives drivers the ability to communicate not just with the truck directly ahead or behind, but with drivers miles away, enough range to know about conditions at the pass before reaching it, and to coordinate position long before the critical geography begins. The callouts are how it all works. When a driver approaches a named landmark or a grade, they announce their position and direction on the radio. Northbound 1 mile, northbound Beaver Slide, southbound Atigun, starting from the bottom. These phrases are precise location identifiers that every haul road driver knows. Beaver Slide, the Shelf, Gobbler's Knob, Roller Coaster, named sections of road with specific handling challenges documented in 10-4 magazine's first-hand account. When a driver calls out their position at one of them, every other driver in radio range knows exactly what that means for traffic management. A southbound convoy calling out from the bottom of Atigun means the grade is occupied. Wait. Or if you are already committed, know who is below you and where. No cell phone service exists on any meaningful stretch of the Dalton. The radio system is not a convenience. It is the only real-time communication infrastructure available on a 400-mile road through wilderness with no towns, No hospitals, no tow trucks on standby, and no emergency services that can reach most points in less than several hours. Alaska DOT operates 7 year-round maintenance camps along the corridor, with crews working 6 in the morning to 6:30 at night on a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotation. The department also maintains 3 programmable message boards, 1 near Fairbanks and 2 on either side of Atigun Pass, to communicate road and avalanche conditions. But because there is no cell coverage along the highway, maintenance operators must physically drive the road to learn conditions, return to camp, and call into the Fairbanks office to have updates entered into the 511 system. The radio call-out culture between drivers is, in many situations, faster and more current than any official infrastructure the state can operate. Carriers that run the Dalton do not hire new drivers and turn them loose to go north. As Alaska Business Magazine quoted from a carrier representative, drivers must complete all required regulatory training, plus specific North Slope training requirements, before being allowed on the road independently. Experienced haul road drivers often accompany new ones for multiple trips before those drivers are cleared to run solo. The knowledge required is not generic trucking knowledge. It is knowledge specific to this road, this weather, this physics. The truck that runs the haul road in winter is typically a Kenworth T680 or Freightliner Cascadia, equipped for Arctic conditions. Diesel fuel treated with anti-gelling additives, battery banks configured for cold weather starting, an auxiliary power unit to maintain sleeper cab temperatures during rest periods, and tire chains available in any season. Fuel tanks are sized with significant reserves. According to Alaska Business Magazine, most Carlisle trucks carry fuel tanks large enough to make the round trip to Prudhoe Bay and back with enough reserve to keep the engine running for several days if a driver gets stranded at the pass. That detail matters because sometimes convoys stop, and what happens to those drivers while they wait is its own kind of story. On the evening of February 27, 2017, an avalanche struck 4 semi-trucks traveling through Atigun Pass between mile 241 and mile 248. Alaska DOT spokeswoman Meadow Bailey confirmed that the avalanche gate on the south side of the pass had been closed that night, the first time those gates had been used since their installation 3 years earlier, and that 4 trucks were already past the gates when the slide hit at approximately 7:30 in the evening. 2 trucks drove out under their own power. 2 others, carrying methanol and glycol respectively, were buried. All 4 drivers escaped without injury. One of those drivers was Chuck Williams, a Carlisle transportation driver with 34 years behind the wheel and 22 years of running the round trip to the North Slope. Williams described the moment of impact in an interview with Alaska's news source. "All of a sudden, it just hit me on the side of the truck. You don't think for that first little 3 to 4 seconds. You're not really thinking anything. You're just hanging on." He added that he didn't hear the first avalanche coming. "It was all of a sudden. It just happened." He heard the 2 following slides, though, as the snowpack continued releasing above him. The highway closed from mile 241 to 248. Blizzard conditions prevented work on Tuesday. Wednesday, crews fired howitzer shells into the avalanche slopes above the road, a procedure verified by Alaska DOT's own avalanche control program, used regularly on the Dalton, the Seward Highway, and the Richardson Highway, to bring down loose snow before sending in heavy equipment. One lane reopened Thursday morning with rough conditions and a line of vehicles clearing through behind the plows. The closure lasted approximately 3 days. During those 3 days, the drivers waiting at either end were not simply parked. They were running. In temperatures that can drop to -40 or colder in the Brooks Range in February, a diesel engine that is allowed to cool completely may not restart without equipment that is not available in the middle of the Arctic wilderness. Every carrier running the Dalton equips their sleeper cabs with auxiliary power units, Thermo King or Carrier Transicold systems that run on a fraction of the fuel the main engine uses and maintain sleeper cab temperature independently. Those APUs are what drivers live inside during extended closures. The sleeper cab becomes not just a resting place, but a survival platform. Heat, food, water, communications, and the specific patience that comes from knowing this is part of the job and always has been. There are 40 to 50 documented avalanche paths along the Atigun Pass corridor. The DOT does not try to prevent all avalanches. It tries to manage them. The howitzers, the gates, and the message boards are tools in a continuous risk management effort that has no equivalent anywhere else on the Dalton. And every driver who runs the pass regularly knows that Atigun's avalanche record is not a reason to avoid the road. It is a reason to know the road, to travel it with the right equipment, and to run it as part of a system rather than as a solo venture into terrain that makes no allowances for improvisation. Here is something that most people driving through a mountain range never have to think about. A loaded semi-truck descending a steep grade in ice generates heat in its brake drums. Not a small amount, enough that brake fade, a temporary reduction in stopping power caused by overheated brake components, is a real hazard on grades like Atigun. Experienced heavy-haul drivers manage this by running the engine brake continuously on long descents, keeping foot brake application brief and modulated rather than sustained. The engine brake uses the engine's own compression to slow the truck, generating braking force without the heat buildup that destroys effectiveness. On a 12% grade with 80+ thousand pounds behind you, that distinction is not academic. It is the difference between controlled descent and a situation that escalates faster than any driver can respond. Now, layer in the convoy factor. The engine brake is loud enough that its use is restricted in many towns and residential areas in the lower 48. On the Dalton, that restriction does not exist. The sound of engine brakes working on a convoy descending Atigun carries across the mountain air for a long way. Drivers behind the convoy hear it before they see it, and the sound tells them what the road is doing. It is one more layer of the information system that makes convoy operations possible on a road with no traffic signals, no lane markings, and no margin for the kind of misunderstanding that is merely inconvenient somewhere else. Speed is another variable the convoy structure regulates. On a gravel road with ice, a loaded truck moving too fast generates projectiles. The Dalton's gravel, hit by a truck at speed, produces flying rock that cracks windshields, damages radiators, and cuts visibility for nearby vehicles. In a convoy, the lead driver's speed sets the pace for every truck behind. When the lead truck slows, the convoy slows. That discipline is not enforced by any external authority. It emerges from the shared professional understanding that the consequences of breaking convoy discipline on this road are not the kind anyone wants to be responsible for. The visual reality of an Arctic convoy is something that people who have encountered one on the Dalton describe with involuntary awe. One account of driving the highway, published in Intrepid Times, described looking ahead and behind simultaneously and finding trucks coming both from the front and behind. A convoy descending toward the observer and a single truck coming up from behind, maneuvering to pass. "I'm coming around," the radio said, and the truck came around, throwing rock and dust over the smaller vehicle, moving across and then in front as the oncoming trucks burst through. The moment passed in seconds. Then the mountain was quiet again. What the observer could not hear from inside a car was the radio traffic that made that pass safe. Southbound Atigun, coming off the top. The acknowledgement from a northbound driver below. The count of vehicles in the convoy called out so approaching drivers knew what to expect. Not one truck, but 5, with spacing between them. On a road with no painted centerline, no guardrails in most places, that radio traffic is the lane management system. It is how 2 lines of loaded semi-trucks negotiate a mountain pass in winter without incident. The term four-wheeler has specific meaning on the haul road. It refers to any non-commercial vehicle, a car, a pickup, anything that is not an 18-wheeler. The relationship between four-wheelers and trucks is established by physics. A loaded truck that is committed to a grade cannot stop as a car can. The inertia is not comparable. When a trucker calls a position on the radio and a four-wheeler is monitoring channel 19, the safest response is to find a pullout and wait. The sign in the avalanche zone says do not stop, but that applies inside the zone itself. Everywhere else, pulling off and letting a convoy pass is simply what experienced drivers of any vehicle on the Dalton do. It is the highway's version of common sense, arrived at not by reading a sign, but by understanding what the trucks are actually doing. The physical experience inside the convoy cab accumulates across a full day on the road. The Dalton is not smooth. The gravel surface heaves in patterns driven by the permafrost beneath it. Ground that is permanently frozen year-round, and that shifts as surface temperatures change, creating the rolling, irregular texture that makes the haul road's ride distinctive. A driver covering the 414 miles in a single push can expect 11 to 15 hours in that cab, depending on load weight and conditions. During that time, the truck is in continuous subtle motion, vibration, correction, adjustment, and the driver's nervous system is processing road information without pause. Traction changing underfoot, the trailer's behavior, the grade ahead, the vehicle in front, and the radio traffic updating the picture every few miles. The Dalton crosses the Yukon River at mile 56, where Yukon River Camp provides a seasonal fuel stop. Coldfoot Camp at mile 175, the world's northernmost truck stop according to Alaska.org, offers fuel around the clock, a cafe, and accommodations that are basic but real. North of Coldfoot, the road runs 240 miles to Dead Horse without a single fuel station, restaurant, rest stop, or hotel. That gap is not empty. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline parallels much of it, and the Brooks Range rises and then falls away as you cross Atigun and emerge onto the North Slope. But it offers nothing that a driver did not bring. This is why the truck is not just a vehicle on this road. It is a complete self-contained system. Fuel capacity, food supply, water, heat, communications, tools, and spare parts. The driver manages all of it while managing the road. North of Atigun, the terrain changes in a way that drivers who see it for the first time describe as almost disorienting. The Brooks Range drops away behind you. The land opens. The trees stop. Boreal forest cannot grow above the divide. And north of it, the landscape is treeless tundra stretching to the Arctic Ocean. In deep winter, this is also the land of polar night, the region above the Arctic Circle, which the Dalton crosses at approximately mile 115, receives no direct sunlight for weeks during the darkest part of the year. Trucks running north in that darkness move with headlights on at all times, as required by regulation on the Dalton regardless of season. And a convoy of lights moving through the Arctic tundra in January is something that very few people alive have seen from close enough to understand what they are watching. The Federal Hours of Service Exemption for Alaska commercial drivers, codified at 49 CFR Section 3951H, E1, allows drivers operating in the state to work within a 15-hour driving window and a 20-hour duty window, a regulatory acknowledgement that haul road distances and conditions cannot be managed under the Lower 48 framework. When a driver is held at Atigun for 3 days by an avalanche closure, the adverse conditions exception at 49 CFR Section 395, 1B1, allows additional time beyond the standard limit when conditions make it unsafe or impractical to reach the destination within normal windows. The regulatory framework recognizes in federal law what the drivers who built the convoy system recognized through experience. This road presents situations that a fixed daily hour count cannot anticipate. The carriers that dominate haul road operations have been running this road for decades. Carlisle Transportation's history in Alaska reaches back to the pipeline construction era. Linden Transport operates a terminal at Dead Horse that is a landmark of North Slope logistics infrastructure. The drivers who run for these carriers are not interchangeable with Lower 48 drivers, the way interstate freight capacity can be interchanged. They carry knowledge that took years to build. Specific to this road, this weather, this equipment, this radio culture. That is worth more to a carrier than any equipment specification. There is a line attributed to retired haul road driver Kenny Seipel in Alaska Business Magazine, a man who ran the road for 30 years. There are two types of truck drivers on the haul road. those who have been in the ditch, and those who are going. It sounds grim. It is professional wisdom. The drivers who have experienced the slide, the loss of traction, the moment when the truck goes where you did not ask it to go, are the ones who understand most precisely what they are managing every mile. They are not describing misfortune. They are describing the education that this road provides, and there is no faster way to receive it. What holds a convoy together is ultimately not technology, not the CB radio, though the radio is essential, not the APU, though the APU is what keeps you alive when the pass closes. What holds a convoy together is the shared understanding among professional drivers that on this road, under these conditions, no single truck can do what a coordinated group of trucks can do. The driver in front of you is giving you information with every decision they make. The driver behind you is relying on you to give them the same. The call out on the radio is not courtesy. It is the operational fact that a driver hundreds of feet back on a blind corner needs to know about before committing to a line they cannot reverse. When the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay need fuel, they get it by truck. When the pipeline pump stations need parts, they arrive by truck. When the remote communities of the North Slope need food and medicine and equipment, it comes up the haul road, convoy by convoy, mile by mile, through the dark, through the cold, through the pass that fires howitzers at its own slopes to stay open. The next time you hear someone use the word convoy, you might think of a military formation or a long parade of vehicles on an interstate. On the Dalton Highway, the word means something more specific and more demanding than either of those things. It means a group of professional drivers running the world's most isolated supply road in Arctic winter, communicating in a language of callouts and radio positions that they have built across decades of shared professional experience, keeping the North Slope alive, one truck at a time, 1 mile at a time. If you think surviving a blizzard at Atigun Pass is the most demanding thing a truck driver faces, wait until we go into wildfire season. Because when the road itself is burning, when the smoke turns the corridor black in the middle of summer and visibility drops to zero, the drivers who run through it face a threat that Arctic training cannot fully prepare you for. That story is coming.